Okay. It's Monday night, just on the heels of Hanukkah, and just reminding one more time that we won't meet the next 2 weeks, but we'll send out essays and we will resume together on January 12th. And also to keep in mind that tonight is the yard site of a friend of Dara's who's on, and of Bracha Lieberman and Ruth Couch, named Donna Rinsky, her Hebrew name Devora Dina Bat Chaim Ruvain. Ruvain, incidentally, does make an appearance in the essay, and we'll have her Aliyat Neshama in mind, Devora Dina Bat Chaim Ruvain, Donna Rinsky, whose yahrzeit is tonight. Um, Let me share my screen. Uh, this essay follows on the heels and feels similar in a way to some of the most recent ones, um, which feel again less. There's a method that's being described, but the way to apply the method feels a little less obvious, and the sort of there's a little more ambiguity, or a little more left to the discretion of the reader in how these methods are deployed. And we'll see a reading which there's something to it, but maybe it's not everything that Ravet Shalom wants to argue it is. As always, it's a close reading. Notices, asks questions on the text that we may or may not agree are questions or may have other answers to, and tries to build them together here using the method as is described intra-biblical parshanut, of looking at a similar story to see how it might illuminate its kind of partner story. So the topic is Yaakov's blessing of Yosef, intra-biblical parshanut. And Ravet Shalom begins, "We are accustomed to thinking of commentary as existing outside of the text, whether it be the homiletics of the Midrash, the linguistic concerns raised by Ibn Ezra, the narrative subtext brought to light by the Radak, Rav David Kimchi, or the ethical instructions derived by Ralbag, by Gersonides. Commentary is separate from the text. This, of course, is the subtext of our entire work, identifying the roots of the commentary within the text itself, right? The idea that reading between the lines, we can notice things which will help us understand what's motivating the commentaries that are laid over the text. Nonetheless, there are clear examples of internal commentary, where the text comments upon itself. Although it is easy to find examples of this within late biblical literature, the greatest example being Chronicles, Divrei Hayamim, chiefly seen as a commentary on Samuel and Kings, on Shmuel and Malachim. There are even examples within the Torah, right? So when we say here the text commenting upon itself, we mean broadly within the entire corpus of Tanakh, texts that are commenting on other texts, and it might be one book commenting on another book. But here we're going to suggest even within a book like Bereshit, there might be stories that are a commentary on other stories. Not that that's their sole purpose, but that in reading them together, we can understand one to be commenting on the other, even if it's there as it's on its own terms as well. Although it's harder to identify commentary within one book, there are numerous texts that are opaque on location, but are explicable by finding a parallel text that reveals much. In this chapter, we will essay a challenging text from the end of Genesis and identify a mirror text earlier in the book. We will then use that earlier text to clear up some of the difficulties in the latter text. One of the most famous deathbed scenes in our literature involves Yaakov's blessing of Yosef and his sons, right? This takes us again to the beginning of Parshat Vayechi, not this week's Parshat Vayigash, but next week's Parshat Vayechi. And we read there, "They are the sons God has given me here," Yosef said to his father. This is after he brings Ephraim and Manasseh, and Yaakov asks who they are. "Then Israel said, 'Bring them to me so I may bless them.' Now Israel's eyes were failing because of old age, and he could hardly see. So Yosef brought his sons close to him, and his father kissed them and embraced them. Israel said to Yosef, 'I did not expect to see your face, and here God has let me see your children also.' Then Yosef removed them from his father's knees, and he bowed himself with his face to the earth. And Yosef took both of them, Ephraim on his right, toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh on his left toward Israel's right hand, and brought them close to him. But Israel reached out his right hand and put it on Ephraim's head, though he was the younger. And crossing his arms, he put his left on Manasseh's head, since Manasseh was the firstborn. Then he blessed Yosef and said, May the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has delivered me from all harm, may he bless these boys. May they be called by my name and the names of my fathers Abraham and Yitzchak, and may they increase greatly upon the earth. Okay, that's from the beginning of Parshat Vayigash. This famous deathbed scene is etched into our consciousness and is replayed in Jewish homes every Friday night when we bless our children. May God make you as Ephraim and Manasseh.
Yes.
Which is just a few verses later in that same chapter. Upon close inspection, there are a few anomalies regarding this narrative which are worthy of our attention. 1. Why did Yaakov embrace and kiss his grandchildren before blessing them? We don't find him doing this with his own children in the subsequent blessing scene, right? We remember that Vayechi really has kind of three main narratives, arguably. Yaakov's blessings to Ephraim and Manasseh, or to Yosef, as we'll see, uh, alongside Ephraim and Manasseh. Then his deathbed blessings to the, all of his sons, and then his death and its aftermath. So, in the first blessing scene with Ephraim and Manasseh, we see him embracing and kissing them before blessing them, but we don't see that when he blesses his own children in the following chapter. So, why the discrepancy? 2, why does it matter which hand is used to bless the more deserving child? 3, if Yaakov wanted to raise the position of Ephraim over that of Manasseh, why didn't he insist that they switch positions? Why cross his hands? Now, again, this is not an earth-shattering question. Could just crossed his hands because it was simpler, and he didn't want to, unsettle Yosef quite as much by saying, or the boys themselves by saying, please switch places. So he just switched his hands. It doesn't seem like the most emphatic question to me, but he goes on and says, this question is exacerbated by the end of verse 14. He crossed his arms because Manasseh was the firstborn. Why is Manasseh being the firstborn a reason for crossing his arms? Again, there I would just say, because he wanted to give Manasseh the blessing with the, with the hand that he gave him. So it says, he crossed his arms because Manasseh was the firstborn, and he needed to give the opposite blessing, so he crossed his arms. I don't know that the because has to be read so as such an immediate causal point. And finally, this is number 4. Why did Yaakov prefer Ephraim to Manasseh, giving him the greater, the right-handed blessing? When challenged by Yosef, his response was, I know it, my son, I know it. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother will be greater than he, and his descendants will become a multitude of nations. However, this response is enigmatic and puzzling. If Yaakov had indicated that Ephraim was more worthy, more saintly, or otherwise more deserving, we could understand. His answer indicates anything but that. It seems that Yaakov has elected to go with the winner and support the son who is destined for greatness. What can we make of his response and his thinking? Right? It's subtle here too. Because he says his younger brother will be greater than he, and his descendants will become a multitude of nations. Does that just mean more powerful, more numerous? That seems to be how Rav Shalom is reading it, and sort of saying, why is that a reason to give, a stronger blessing? If it were merit-based, I could understand, but if it's just, putting your money on the horse you think is going to win the race by virtue of its size or strength, why is that a compelling reason? And finally, 5th, what was the blessing with which Yaakov blessed his grandchildren while he had his hands on their heads? The text indicates that as he placed his hands on their heads, he blessed Yosef regarding their well-being, but not them. Okay, so we have a series of questions, again, to me, some stronger than others, but we notice some anomalies in this passage. Even a cursory reading of our text quickly brings to mind another blessing scene in Genesis, which we essayed earlier. Yitzchak blessing Yaakov in the guise of Esav.
Yes.
followed by the actual blessing received by Esav. Right? So we have two brothers, the blessing playing out in a way which is unexpected. Um, and you know, this is father that case is father to sons, this is father to grandsons, but the son is there. So there certainly are immediate surface parallels to start off with. And we'll hear some more. In both scenes, continues Rav Shalom, the one who bestows the blessing, Yitzchak or Yaakov, suffers from poor eyesight. He embraces the recipient or recipients of the blessings. Now that, just to, to fact check, um, in the story of Yitzchak's blessings to Yaakov posing as Esav, Yaakov comes and says, I'm Esav, your firstborn. I did as you told me, come eat from the game so that you can, bless me. Yitzchak says, how did you get here so quickly? And Yaakov says, God granted me good fortune. And Yitzchak says to Yaakov, Gishana va'amu shechabani, come closer that I may feel you, my son, whether you are really my son Esav or not. Yaakov drew close, and his father felt him and wondered. The voice is the voice of Yaakov. The hands are the hands of Esav. Um, and then, he says, are you really Esav? And he says, come close and kiss me. So, some kind of embrace doesn't seem to be exactly the same thing. Um, but an affectionate physical connection, we could say. Okay, so we have the parallels. The one who bestows the blessing suffers from poor eyesight. He embraces the recipient or recipients of the blessing. And the text of the blessing is not mentioned in the text, right? So we already saw that that was the case in this latter one, in the one for Ephraim and Menashe. And we see it here too. Um, he says, again, we'll have to see what Rav Shalom says about this. Um, because it says, He blessed him, saying, the smell of my son is like the smell of the fields that the Lord has blessed. May God give you the dew of heaven, etc. Let people serve you. Sounds like a blessing. So we'll have to get clarity on why Rav Shalom thinks there's not a blessing. So he says, look at verses 23 and 27 more carefully. So it seems like he's noting that in 23 it says he didn't recognize him because his hands were hairy like those of his brother Esav. Vayavarachehu. So he blessed him. Then it says, are you really my son? When he said, I am. Then he says, come close and kiss me. And then he blessed him, saying, etc., etc. So if we take those as two separate occasions of blessing, the first blessing, we don't know the content of it. We could always just say that that's the summary, and then we go into more detail, and that second blessing is the blessing. So a little unclear. More accurately, now he's going to refine it, right? Each scene includes two blessings, neither of which is explicitly presented in the text. Again, I don't know why your brother will serve you and get the blessings of dew, etc., is not considered a blessing. We'll have to see that a little further on. There are several questions, as you know, with Rav Shalom. The majority of the essay is probably building up the questions, and then we get the framework for the answers and a quick summary of the answers at the end. There are several questions to be asked about the narrative in chapter 27, in addition to the parallel questions we've already raised from chapter 48, the resolution of which will help us understand Jacob's behavior with his grandsons, right? So we're looking at our, next week's Parshat, Vayigash, and looking at this blessing scene and saying, some things are strange about it. Now, hold on a minute. There's another story that happened already that reminds me of it. I go there and I say, oh, some of the same strangenesses appear there. And I have some additional questions about that story. And if I can answer the questions about that story, maybe it'll help me shed light on the second story. Again, we could always say, well, why not just address the second story and answer its questions from the context there? So here are additional questions from the Yitzchak and Yaakov and Esav story. Why was Rivka so concerned that Yaakov get that particular blessing, even at the risk of his being cursed instead? 2. What is the relationship, if any, between Yaakov's purchase of the Bechorah, the right of the firstborn, at the end of chapter 25, and his deceptive taking of the blessing, right, the bracha, in chapter 27? And then 3, to paraphrase Esav's question, did Yitzchak have only one blessing to bestow? Why couldn't their father have repeated the same blessing or given one of equal worth to Esav?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. That's Esav's question itself.
Yeah.
Okay, so as he's done in the past, we have throw in one more question, and then we'll try to offer the answer. So Rav Echelon continues. I'd like to ask one more question before beginning to decipher our text. As we see from Yaakov's gift of a double portion, actually noteworthy in the last essay, the additional question also came from Chumash Devarim. So here we are again, jumping to Chumash Devarim. As we see from Yaakov's gift of a double portion of land to Yosef, he was given the financial benefits of the Bechorah, right? Yosef was given the financial benefits of the Bechorah. The verse in First Chronicles states, "And the sons of Ruvain, the firstborn of Israel, for he was the firstborn, i.e., Ruvain. But because he defiled his father's bed, his birthright was given to the sons of Yosef, the son of Israel, yet not so that he was to be reckoned in the genealogy as firstborn. For Judah prevailed among his brethren, and of him came he who is the prince. But the birthright was Joseph's." This is chapter 5, verse 1 of First Chronicles, Divrei Hayamim Aleph. Besides the financial benefits of the Bechorah, double inheritance, which Yosef got, there seems to be a second component inherent in the Bechorah, right, in the firstbornhood, political power. The verse indicates that although the financial rights of Ruvain's Bechorah were bestowed to Yosef, the political component was given to Yehuda, who became prominent among his brothers. The Midrash in Agadat Bereshit adds a third dimension to the Bechorah, Kuhuna, priesthood. This is further demonstrated by the switch of these rights and responsibilities to the Levites in Bamidbar, where it is clear that representation at worship, i.e., being, the people who minister in the service of God at the tabernacle, at the temple, was the duty of the firstborn. Let's see also Onkelos. In other words, until Sinai, the firstborn in a family would inherit three rights: double inheritance, right, a double portion of land or estate, political control over the family, and representation of the family at sacrificial rites. On his deathbed, Yaakov gave the financial Bechorah to Yosef and the political Bechorah to Judah. But who received the worship Bechorah? Unanswered question for now. He continues. The families of Abraham and Yitzchak did not follow the ideal pattern for Jewish family life. In each case, only one son, right, i.e., Yitzchak from Abraham and Yaakov from Yitzchak, only one son was chosen to carry on the tradition of the family, and the rest were sent away. Right, with Abraham, remember, it's not just Ishmael who was sent away, but he has the children of Keturah and the children called the Bnei HaPilagshim. Right, then they're sent away. The conventional understanding is that the first proper family within our tradition, proper as Rav Shalom is defining it, as everybody continues the family line and no one is sent away. The first proper family within our tradition was that of Yaakov, 12 sons, all included and all maintainers of the tradition. We therefore expect the firstborn, Ruvain, to be accorded the usual rights appropriate for that position, and are surprised to see them taken away from him. I'd like to propose another way of understanding Yaakov's family. And again, it's while this explanation or way of understanding can be you could work backwards kind of from the end of this essay and understand how Rav Echelon might have come to see it this way, but it's not glaringly obvious in the text. And this is what makes some of these methods hard to follow or hard to replicate. So I'd like to propose another way of understanding Yaakov's family. Just as Abraham and Yitzchak's job was to raise one son to follow in their respective footsteps, similarly, Yaakov had the responsibility to raise 12 sons to build upon the tradition he received. In other words, he was not raising one family with the eldest occupying the conventional position of Bechor. He was raising 12 families, each of which would have their own Bechor. Although Reuven is called the Bechor of Yaakov, this may be referring to simple birth order, not to position within the family, meaning role of leadership within the family. This explains how Yaakov transferred the Bechorah to Yosef, something that is forbidden in Deuteronomy. He wasn't eliminating a Bechor. He was simply appointing the family headed by the financial wizard among the sons as a chief financial officer of his estate, i.e., Canaan. In the same way, he appointed Judah, who had earned the allegiance of his brothers, as the family that would rule over the other families, but only with regard to those issues that affect all 12 as a unit. Within each family, the Bechor would hold both financial and political rule. Okay, so a little bit of a tricky idea to follow, but he seems to be saying that Yaakov's 12 sons each would be a distinct unit. Each unit would have its firstborn Bechor who had the traditional firstborn roles, but different of those families took on different responsibilities within Yaakov's overall household and estate. And it wasn't, not all of those roles were preserved within the family of Ruvain, but the family of Ruvain and the family of Shimon, etc., all had their own Bechor. Again, it's a little bit tricky because why doesn't Ruvain do all those things? It's not totally clear. In the same way he appointed Judah, we said, within each family, the Bechor would hold both financial and political rule. Regarding the kahuna, the spiritual Bechorah, that remained within each of the sons of Israel and became the responsibility of each of their firstborn sons, right? So that was his way of answering the question. Financial Bechorah to Yosef's family, political Bechorah to Yehuda's family, but who received the worship Bechorah? All of them. Okay.
A question.
Yes.
Dinah is not considered at all in this case, right? Because
Yes.
a woman and she's kind of like fallen woman for not her own fault. It is not at all considered.
Right, right. It does seem that way. The dimension of fallenness, there's obviously an aspect of that in the text. The rabbis develop it in different ways, but I'm not sure that that needs to be relevant even to the consideration. Even without that episode, it seems like women did not inherit when there were, even when there weren't sons until later on in the Torah, certainly when there were sons. And so she doesn't seem to head her own family, exactly as you said, Peter.
Nothing isn't given in marriage to anybody. So, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. But, and had she been given, I mean, this, of course, is one of these hard to answer questions about these early generations. Who would she have been given in marriage to? And how would that person have, if they were not a son of Jacob, how would they have occupied
Any,
a share in Jacob's
yeah,
household. So it was a little tricky there.
right.
Um, okay, carrying forward, we're building our argument now. Smicha, embrace and transmission. The first idea that Rav Shalom has introduced to us is this idea of the kind of different way the Bechorah was assigned within the generation of Yaakov's children, that each constituted their own sort of family unit with their own Bechor. And there was no one Bechor for within Yaakov's children. The different roles were disseminated a little bit amongst a couple of them. Now we're going to get a second sort of new idea. Rav Ovadia Sforno, in explaining the importance of the right hand in Yaakov's blessing, states, since laying of the hands, smicha, with the hand, focuses the spirit toward the object upon which it is placed, as he placed his hands upon him, referring to Moshe's smicha of Yehoshua, and the right hand is generally stronger than the left. Therefore, the smicha of the right hand will focus more than the smicha of the left. Smicha is a law that first appears in the beginning of Leviticus, of Vayikra, B'samach yado, he shall lay his hand upon the head of the burnt offering, the olah, all the way in the first chapter. The requirement of smicha is such that in the case of any private offering, immediately prior to slaughtering the animal, the owner of the offering must lay his hands on the animal with all of his strength. In his explanation of the meaning behind animal offerings, Ramban, in Vayikra chapter 1, verse 9, suggests that the person bringing the offering should view himself as if he were on the altar. The catharsis of offerings is achieved when the owner experiences his own sacrifice vicariously through the offering. Smicha, performed immediately before the offering is slaughtered, is the process by which the owner transmits his energy into the animal, in order that the offering truly represent him on the altar. And he adds parenthetically, on the point of smicha with all of one's strength, think of how powerfully we hug a close friend or loved one at times of great sadness or joy, and compare it to how we hug a casual acquaintance when the occasion calls for it. Right? So the forceful laying of hands, according to the Ramban, uh, the forceful laying of hands Rav Echelom inserts into the Ramban's framework of the meaning of laying of hands is a vigorous pressing of one's own self into the animal so that when one is able to have the sense when the animal is being sacrificed that it's a kind of a self-sacrifice. There is another smicha in the legal corpus, sorry, it's a little blurry here, besides that preceding an offering. As Forno points out, when Moshe was preparing to transmit the mantle of leadership to Yehoshua, he performed smicha on Yehoshua, laying his hands on Joshua's head. Following Sforno's reasoning, Moshe was transmitting his energy or his self to Yehoshua, investing him with at least a connection to Moshe's experience atop Sinai. Through the 1400 years when smicha was operative, right? It ends at some time in the Tannaitic period, according to the Gemara. Each recipient of smicha was given a piece of the experience of Moshe at Sinai, along with all of the others in the intervening chain. Each recipient had a direct link to the revelation at Sinai and to the fount from which the oral law springs. Three types of blessings. Okay, before Sinai, there were three types of blessings bestowed by people. The conventional well-wishing blessing, Genesis 47, 7 and 10. Let's go see that. Right, so this is sort of a greeting type of blessing. When this is now we get a little snippet of our Parsha at the end of Vayigash when Yaakov and family come down to Egypt and Yosef presents Yaakov in front of Paro, and it says Vayivarech Yaakov et Paro. Yaakov greeted Paro, and then again Vayivarech Yaakov et Paro Vayitzei milifnei Paro. Yaakov bade Pharaoh farewell, left Pharaoh's presence. We could even argue to a certain degree that that's the case when Yaakov parts ways with the angel, or the Ish with which he's wrestling, and he says, let me go. The Ish says, let me go because the dawn is breaking. Yaakov says, Lo ashalecha chakim beirachtani. I won't send you until you bless me. And it's not totally clear what the blessing is at that point because it just then says, after a little bit that he blessed him there. And some of the commentaries say the leave taking was the blessing. Um, so it may or may not fit in that category. But this is, by the way, this little paragraph, 3 bullet points, could be the essay and be worthy of unpacking on its own. These three types of blessing. So one is just the sense of greeting and the good word that's given upon greeting or parting.
Can
Two,
I ask a question here?
yes, Peter, please.
When a shoiched shechts an animal, is there any transference of similar kind before he does that?
I have not learned Hilchot Shchita, although it was a long-standing curricular part of Smicha. It was not at Chovevei required. I'm not aware of there being Smicha in what we call Shchitat Chulin, right? In
Right.
something that's not a cultic sacrifice, but is rather being slaughtered for mundane consumption, so to speak. I'm not aware of there being a dimension of Smicha, and that doesn't surprise me um, because we actually do want to preserve a kind of a distinction between offerings, animals that are being offered to God, even if the priests, in temple times did partake in some degree,
Okay.
and plain old non-sacred food consumption. Yes, as far as I know, there's not. Um,
Or in Korban Pesach, that's another.
Right, that's an interesting case. Now,
Yeah.
I think also not, and just remembering that he said above in his little summary of smicha, any private offering um, has
Okay.
the owner laying their hand. So my hunch is not. Korban Pesach is a funny hybrid in certain ways between an individual offering and a communal offering.
Right.
So maybe Lance will ask AI if there's smicha on the Korban Pesach or not, and see what we find out for as an initial exploration. I don't trust until we can verify, but okay. We're back in our three types of blessing: conventional well-wishing, greeting and parting; the designation blessing, which was, for example, in Parshat Vayechi, Yaakov's deathbed, last will and testament. This designation blessing was an assignment of duties, properties, and the like within the family, right? Sort of a blessing as a charge. I charge you with this responsibility. I endow you with these gifts, that kind of thing.
That
And
was
the
kind I'm sorry. It sounded like a prophetic thing, what each member of the tribe will do,
yes, yes,
right?
yes,
More than
yes.
okay.
Yes, that's why, like I
Thank you.
said, this little section, the notion of blessing within the Torah, I'm not sure if it can quite so simply be differentiated into these three categories alone, but it's a really interesting exercise, and warrants more study. And I know that in not not this Shabbat, I believe, but next Shabbat perhaps, our rabbinic intern, Yael Turitz Kaplan, is giving a shiur on the question of the notion of blessings in the Torah. So I sent this on to her, and I'll be curious to see what she comes up with. Um,
Okay.
and then number three, the conferral blessing, which was the model for the post-Sinaitic smicha. Unlike a well-wishing blessing in which the person who's most deserving gets the finest wish, this blessing is a real conferral of power and strength to the recipient. Since this conferral blessing was a highly charged emotional experience reflecting a deep connection between the two parties involved, in order for it to be effective, the bestower had to first have a direct connection to the recipient. Sforno explains that Yaakov requested that Yosef bring his sons close in order to embrace them. The embrace was intended to create the proper emotional and spiritual connection between them to make the conferral blessing, again, that smicha, the laying of hands blessing, effective. Okay, we can now address those questions we
Right.
asked about the
Yes,
Yitzchak,
since this
Yaakov,
has
Esav scenario. Yes.
become more interactive, can you explain the difference between point two and point three?
Um, yeah. Good question. It seems like it seems like um well he'll do a little more as it goes on. Um so I'm hesitant to try to unpack it here because he's going to try to distinguish them a little bit more as it goes forward. So let's come back to it at the end. Um okay, and I saw Lance's hand while we're paused anyway from the essay. Lance, did you have an answer for us initial?
Yes, the answer is yes. However, the smichas, the answer is yes as far as the Paschal Lamb before the end of the temple uh,
Mm-hmm.
structures. However, after the temple is destroyed, apparently it was not done.
Mm-hmm.
And the
Oh,
shank, I think it's the shank bone. Let me see.
Yep.
right.
Is the remnant, so to speak, of this at the Seder,
Yeah.
right?
Yep. Great. Great.
Um, yeah.
Okay, so we do have, so just circling back to Peter, we do have a sacrifice which gets eaten by the owners, which gets smicha, or I should say it differently. We do get meat which gets eaten by the owners, which would be true about a shlamim also,
Right.
which has smicha, the laying of the hands upon it. But again, that's already, it still has its the beginning of its process connected to the Mishkan or Mikdash, as opposed to the meat that we eat at our tables, in a post-temple period, or even when the temple stood and there was non-sacrificial meat. I believe that would not have required smicha because it really is a different genre. So the Korban Pesach is close to a boundary case, but still falls comfortably in the realm of kind of cultic sacrificial.
Right.
Okay, going further. We can now address those questions we asked about the Yitzchak Yaakov Esav scenario. Rivka was aware that Yaakov had purchased the rights of the firstborn from Esav, meaning that he would be in charge of the family affairs, both financial and political, right? This was still in the realm where there was one child who carried on the family tradition, and they got that firstborn, which came with all of the duties. Yitzchak was evidently unaware of the sale. The person in charge, okay, now we get one of his kind of, I don't know, call it chidushim, one of his hot takes, and we'll see whether we agree. The person in charge is in the greatest need of support and strength. There are always those who would overthrow him, and he has nowhere to go but down. The underdog, in contrast, can only move up. This is something Rav Avi often says. You're most vulnerable when you're at the top. Rivka was so concerned that Yaakov should receive Yitzchak's strength and power through the conferral blessing that she was willing to risk the possibility of a curse. When Yaakov approached Yitzchak, his father embraced him. Again, we saw that. Hold on, gotta get back to my. Trying to move my tabs here. There we go. Yeah, Yaakov drew close to Yitzchak. Again, the embrace is not 100% clear, but when Yaakov approached Yitzchak, his father embraced him, attended to his voice, and blessed him. This is apparently a conferral blessing, as there are no blessing words provided here. So again, maybe back towards David's question, conferral blessing, a smicha, is an investiture with the something of the identity or emotion of the blessor without any words. That's a kind of first take here. Yitzchak then ate and drank of the venison brought by Yaakov, embraced him again, smelled his clothes, and blessed him again. Note that Yitzchak connected with Yaakov using all four available senses. Subsequent to these blessings, which I'm theorizing are both occasions of smicha, right? So we'll just go again there and see. So it's just confusing because here it says he blessed him saying, the smell of my son is like the smell of the fields that the Lord has blessed. May God give you, etc. So we have to see if he's differentiating these two, right? So he's going to read, and it's a hard read. He's going to read the next verses, may God give you the dew of heaven, etc., as a separate blessing. He's got two moments of wordless or almost wordless conferral, connection, laying of the hands, and then speech act blessings, which are different, right? And as he says, after the two laying of hands, conferral blessings, Yitzchak says, "May God give you of the dew of heaven, the fatness of earth, etc., etc." These words are not the blessing, as he has already blessed Yaakov. Again, that's contingent on our reading it as um, uh, he smelled his clothes and he blessed him, period. And he said, the smell of my son is like the smell of the fields that the Lord has blessed. And then the next part, may God give you, is a new thing, not the, and he blessed him up above. So it's you have to do some, put some periods where there might be commas or colons in another reading. These words are not the blessing, as he has already blessed Yaakov. Rather, these words represent a verbal version of the strength he has given his son. To wit, he is affirming in words that which he has already transferred by hand. Not only has he transmitted the ability to receive God's bounty, but also the strength to rule over his brother. There is a textual hint to this idea. In 27:37, Yitzchak declares, "Behold, I have made him lord over you, and have given all of his brothers to him as slaves, and with grain and wine, simachtiv, I have sustained him." Note that Yitzchak himself states that he has performed a type of smicha on Yaakov, right? This is after Esav comes in and, says, "Father, sit up and eat." Yaakov says, "Who are you?" And he says, "I'm Esav." Yitzchak says, "Then who came before. Um, and Esav says, don't you have a blessing for me also? And Yitzchak says, your brother came and took it already. Um, and Yitzchak, says, what blessing can I give you? And he ultimately gives him a little something. But prior to that, he says, I made your brother master over you. V'dagan v'tirosh samachtiv. They translate here, I sustained him with grain and wine. But there's that sort of sense of I did smicha on him, and that means somehow that I can't do the same for you. It's no wonder then that Yitzchak is out of blessings when the real Esav shows up. How can he give the same ruling strength to two people? The best he can do is to give Esav the strength that when you break loose, you shall break his yoke from your neck. Okay, so again, we've now gone back to read the story of Yitzchak and Esav with our kind of two core points. One, the point about Bechorah being the in charge role of leadership in the family, and the idea that the person who has that role is going to be vulnerable and need alongside that a blessing which is about the investiture of strength and power, and that kind of blessing necessitates the actual laying of hands and the physical closeness. And so all of that is what happened between between Yitzchak and Yaakov, who we may have thought was Esav, and then there was nothing really left for Esav as a result. We can now go back to the scene at Yaakov's bedside and understand it in a new light. And Yosef said to his father, these are my sons whom God has given me here. Then Yisrael said, bring them to me so I may bless them. Yaakov wanted to confer the strength of leadership on Yosef's family, right? So they needed to come close. Now Israel's eyes were failing because of old age and he could hardly see, so Yosef brought his sons close to him and his father kissed them and embraced them. In order to confer this strength, he had to first connect with these two sons of Yosef, which he did by embracing them, right? That was the moment of physical connection and closeness, because that emotional bond is necessary to do the investiture, the conferral. Yisrael said to Yosef, I didn't expect to see your face, and here God has let me see your children also. Then Yosef removed them from his father's knees, and he bowed himself with his face to the earth. Here we see that the original embrace was merely a preparation.
Lost the sound.
What's that? Peter, you don't hear us? Oh. Peter?
Yes.
Okay, we're here.
Okay. Thanks.
Sure. We see that the original embrace was merely a preparation for the blessing, not the blessing itself, because after the embrace, there isn't yet a blessing. There's a separation, a pause, sort of a pause. And Yosef took both of them, Ephraim on his right towards Yisrael's left hand, and Manasseh on his left towards Yisrael's right hand, and brought them close. But Yisrael reached out his right hand and put it on Ephraim's head, though he was the younger, and crossing his arms, he put his left hand on Manasseh's head, since Manasseh was the firstborn. Since Manasseh was the firstborn, he would always maintain that status and would be the spiritual leader of that family. Manasseh's position in the family necessitated that he not be switched to the left side. So in order for Yaakov to give Ephraim the stronger blessing, he had to cross his arms. Finally, or almost finally, and he blessed Yosef and said, the God before whom my fathers Avram and Yitzchak did walk, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who's delivered me from all harm, may he bless these boys, may they be called by my name and the names of my fathers Avram and Yitzchak, and may they increase greatly upon the earth. Note that here he is blessing Yosef, not Yosef's sons. This is a well-wishing blessing, okay? Remember our three genres, the greeting and parting, blessing of, good wishes, the conferral blessing, and then the final, and we were, still trying to discern that distinction, but the final, the second was the designation blessing, an assignment of duties, properties, and the like, and then the conferral blessing, which is that third. So here what we're saying is that in the Ephraim and Manasseh story, the first blessing, here we go, was the conferral blessing, and then the blessing to Yosef, which seems kind of to interject here, the blessing of Yosef is not a conferral blessing or a assignment of duties blessing. It's a well-wishing blessing. And when Yosef saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, it displeased him. So he took his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. Yosef said to his father, "Not so, my father. Since this one is the firstborn, put your right hand on his head." And his father refused and said, "I know it, my son, I know it. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall become a multitude of nations." This previously enigmatic response is now clear. Yaakov is not favoring the winner. He's giving the greatest strength, his right hand, following Sforno's explanation, to the son who will need it the most, whose progeny will be more numerous and widespread. So again, it's subtle, but the idea is he's not just saying he's greater, so I wanna bless him, but because he's greater, and again, this is a point which I think is complex, because he's greater, he's more vulnerable. It's it's a I don't know what to call it. It's a dubious. Maybe I'll say it's dubious. It's dubious. Um, he's greater, so he's more vulnerable to attack, um, and therefore he needs the strengthening more. And he blessed them that day, saying, "By you, Yisrael will invoke blessings, saying, May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh." So he put Ephraim ahead of Manasseh. Again, as in the Yitzchak Yaakov story, a second embrace leads to a second conferral blessing. Yaakov then verbalizes a consequence of the blessing, that these two boys will be the model of all blessings. This, however, is not the essence of the blessing, which is the conferral of power. So I guess based on all of this, coming back to David Lowenfeld's question before, the assignment of duties and responsibilities is kind of the least prominent, if we could say such a thing. That's the deathbed blessings in which maybe, again, roles are assigned, but not, but kind of strength and force. I don't know what the right description is exactly, is not being transferred, but responsibilities and duties are being delineated. There's a charge that's being given, but the investiture of strength or power isn't being made there. That's in the conferral moment. A couple closing points. The Midrash Tanchuma indicates that his younger brother shall be greater than he, refers to Joshua, who will come from the tribe of Ephraim and will conquer the land. Interesting, is it not, that this smicha was a forerunner to the first official smicha given, as Moshe lays his hands on the head of Joshua and conferred upon him the mantle of leadership. So, just a homiletical, cute point. Maybe he means it to be more than cute, but a cute point, or I guess would say noting that maybe the Midrash Tanchuma, sort of picking up on something, linking this first conferral blessing, or not first, but this moment of conferral blessing, which is a subtler kind of conferral blessing, linking Joshua in it. Ephraim is the one who gets it, but linking it to Joshua, a descendant of Ephraim, who actually is the one who gets the first really explicit kind of smicha. So I think he's maybe aiming to suggest that this is a kind of a proof text, that the Tanchuma is, validating the reading he's trying to make, that the blessing to Ephraim is a kind of a smicha, conferral blessing. Finally, often and afterward, often to quote the rabbinic maxim, words of Torah are poor in one place and rich in another. By finding parallel and associated passages, we are able to shed light on each of them as they inform each other and us to discover what lies between the lines. It usually comes back to that phrase as it's the title of the book. So again, it's the principle of the method um, is there for us to think about, looking for parallel scenes, noticing the challenges in one, and seeing perhaps the parallels in another and its challenges, but then here comes the impossible part, just trying to develop theories from other places in the Torah and from one's own conjecture to resolve those difficulties and then try to apply them across the board. That's the most idiosyncratic part here, and I don't know, maybe not totally satisfying this week. But certainly this notion, for me, I think the biggest takeaway is this attempted taxonomy of blessings, right? The idea of what are these different kinds of blessings? How do they function? Um, And how does that help us clarify who gets which ones and why? I think, again, whether we agree with the answers or not, I think that the way what that opens up for us about close readings of passages that include the language of bracha. Is there physical proximity? Is there a laying of the hands? Is it linked to the assignment of duties and responsibilities, or is it just a well wish? These are identification points that we can look for in passages about blessing to try to help us differentiate them and understand what's going on and why. Um, so, thoughts or reactions or questions? Stunned silence is not usually a good sign.
No, I asked all my questions, jumping in.
Okay. Okay, Peter. It's covered from along the way. Yep. David Al.
I usually want to go after Lance.
Okay. Does Lance have a Lance is invited?
Okay, well, one of the questions I would have is Jacob, first of all, Jacob blesses um, Ephraim and Manasseh. Now, what happens to them? I mean, isn't Joseph there for a long period of time after this meeting, after the death of Jacob? And what happens to the kids? Second of all, what gives Jacob the right to do that? In other words, these kids are the product of a mixed marriage. And if you go on with the mother thing, then they're Egyptian, not Israelite,
Hmm.
right?
Well, that's not clear. Is that if Asenath, according to the Midrash, was really Dinah's daughter, then pretty much in a fold, if that Midrash is truthful. So they're not really Egyptian at all. There's
That's if
no,
you subscribe to the Midrash.
well,
But
I have to. I have
a,
nothing else to subscribe
a
to.
larger question I have is you got the 12 tribes. They all get the blessing. However, the blessings are obviously not equal, right?
Right.
But what happens to the tribes? We only have what? Three that produce Jews.
Yes. This
Yep.
is
But
true.
there are so many potential Jews coming from other tribes.
The lost in
Um,
the world.
Samaritans alone,
Yeah,
who, by the way, to this moment, sacrifice the Paschal Lamb, which my understanding
they do.
is a commandment of God forever. But the state
Yes.
of Israel will not allow the rabbis to do that. That's an odd thing, isn't it?
Hmm.
I mean, the rabbis are ready. The nascent Sanhedrin is ready to go with Kohanim in Israel, going to the Temple Mount and sacrificing the Paschal Lamb. But my understanding is, I could be wrong, the state of Israel refuses to allow that. The state of Israel says nothing about the Samaritans doing it. And I know my own former rabbi, Rabbi Ginsburg, was actually at one of the Samaritan Pesach sacrifices at Paschal Lamb. In fact, my Mahutin was also there. Um,
Located where?
it they were on Mount Gerizim.
Mount Gerizim. Okay,
Yeah,
wow.
yeah. But then
Well,
you have other
sure.
problems. I think the Nigerian Jewish Igbo. You have the Ethiopian Kesach, and you have maybe others who are Jews. Why not?
Yes.
Why aren't they Jews? They're Jews. How do you know they're not Jews?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, the Samaritans are not considered Jews, right?
I,
Partly
I
because they assimilated with the Assyrians and rabbis. And also, the most important thing here is that historically, there is a tremendous hostility between the rabbis and the Samaritans,
Hmm.
right? And personally, I would argue that that is really at the root of what's going on in the Torah and in the New Testament. Because in John 8, Jesus is accused of being a demon and a Samaritan. He says, I'm no demon. Doesn't say a word about not being a Samaritan. Plus, think of the Good Samaritan. Who's the Good Samaritan? It's Jesus, right? And
Interesting.
the woman at the well, the Samaritans take Jesus, and who is technically a rabbi, right? He's not Christian. He's not a Christian
it's
at that
true.
point. and the Samaritan's love. And there's also the episode of the Samaritan leper. The only one who comes to thank Jesus is a Samaritan. So there's a lot of arguments both ways. But all I'm saying is, personally, I think that there is what I call the Kohen blood libel. And that is that the Samaritans are rejected by the rabbis because the Samaritans are a Kahanic religion. They're run by a Kahanic high priest. There are Samaritans named Cohen.
Great.
Wow.
Wow, a lot to think about there,
Yes.
and
Well,
some
you
history,
asked for
biblical
it,
history. I
guys.
don't know. Yep, yep,
You opened the door.
yes, yes. Um, yeah, but the just to circle back to the back and forth between you and Peter, I think the yeah the and it's similar to the Dina question, uh, which is that I mean the related midrashically, which is just that what do we do with Ephraim and Manasseh, and maybe that's part of the story. Maybe the kind of adoption of them by Yaakov is an attempt to respond to their mixed parentage. If don't adopt the midrash, maybe it solves a number of questions sort of at the same time. So there's
Yeah.
a lot to try
Unresolved.
there. Yeah, yeah. Okay, back to David L.
Yes, first of all, thank you, Lance. You never fail to give us things to think about and also to express the positions of the political party, Cohen. Um, in
Now
listening,
you got it.
and I'm going to go out even further beyond the text. I'm going to wander out further tonight. Um, I thought that the discussion of transferring energy, transferring experience, transferring role, transferring authority were all very interesting. And then if you read it together with what he says early on with the identification of the sacrifice. And what it struck me was, is Yaakov or any of the Avot executing a fiduciary responsibility to the next generation by setting up systems for success, whether by recognizing ability or whether by imbuing certain abilities in the people? Or are they actually embracing and establishing their own sense of immortality,
Mm, mm,
identifying and living on with the next characters?
mm.
And in this regard, I want to commend to the academics among us the work of Professor Ethan Lieb, who writes interestingly about he's a law professor at Fordham, and he writes about and of our community and what are the responsibilities and appropriate legal models to think about the relationship between parents and children.
Great, great. I'm looking up Ethan Lieb. It sounds great, and yeah, I think it's a beautiful reflection on that question. What transmission, connection, continuity is being created in those relationships? Um, there's and even just thinking about you have the hands on the head, and you also have the hand by the thigh kind of moments. So sort of these kind of physical connections, transferences or transferings, or transfers. uh, what are they? What content, what message are they trying to convey or achieve? I think is a
And the
great.
difference between holding close and letting go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's great. Great. Thank you. Yeah, so I think come to motion a moment just to sort of say, yeah, I appreciate if maybe the winding path he was trying to lead us down wasn't on its own entirely compelling. Some of the stops along the way, invited some further reflection, which was great. Moshe?
Yeah. What I wanted to say is like, when I went to yeshiva, I don't think my rabbis ever quoted anything, from the New Testament and try to bring it into our Torah. And if I don't know if you ever heard of the Christian identity movement. They believe that the white European men are supposed to be descended from 10 tribes, like Denmark, supposed to be Denmark. And Ephraim and Menashe, one is supposed to, own a lot of other lands. The other one's supposed to the younger one. You could say that's Great Britain and the United States, if you look at it that way. Just just like I guess certain things you just have to take on faith.
Yeah.
Suppose what I heard also that the royal family of Great Britain thinks that they were descended, from the house of David, and all the males are supposed, I don't know, are supposed to be, circumcised,
Yeah.
So you just have to take certain things on faith.
Right. Right. And we make different decisions about which things we want to take on faith and which things we want to attempt to demand proof for. And these sort of questions of identity and lineage are slippery. Absolutely. All right. On that note, again, reminding us that we're not meeting the next 2 weeks, but we'll send out essays, and we'll be picking up on Va'era with Brachi Elitzor's writings in 3 weeks' time, January 12th. Wishing everyone as bright a post-Hanukkah time as it can be, and quiet winter break for those who have some semblance of winter break or slowing down period. And we'll see everybody soon.
Have a nice trip. Thank you.
Thank
What's up,
you.
Stephen?
Thank
Good night,
you.
all. Bye-bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Thank you.